the issues affecting Asia's animals, and the stories of the people working on their behalf. We'll be taking you on a tour of what's been happening lately in the animal protection space around Asia, and also bringing you updates from our huge network of animal protection organizations and our many working groups. Welcome to the Asia for Animals podcast.
Hi, my name is Brooke. I am the lead coordinator of the Asia for Animals Macaque Coalition, and this is the first episode of All About Macaques. We'll have several other episodes scattered throughout the year, and today our focus is going to be macaques and people, a focus on rhesus macaques in northern India. Our guest today is Uddalak Bindhani, who is a PhD student at the Wildlife Institute of India. He's studying the ecology and behavior of rhesus macaques in human-dominated landscapes, both where he works and across many of the regions that certain species macaque, and across many of the regions in which certain species of macaques live. Their interactions with humans can be quite negative, causing an array of problems for both humans and for monkeys. So Uddalak's studies can shed light on some of the causes and potential solutions to such interactions. Welcome, Uddalak.
Yeah, first and foremost, Brooke, thank you so much for inviting me and having me here on this podcast. I'm really honored, and I hope that after the discussion, our listeners can actually gain some insight into how the dynamics between humans and macaques play in the northern part of India. And so my name is Uddalak Bindhani. I'm from West Bengal, India, but I am currently pursuing a PhD on rhesus macaques, especially the way they move around and utilize their habitat in an anthropogenic setup in the northern part of India, in a place called Dehradun, where I'm presently based and where my institute, the Wildlife Institute of India, is also based. So I have started working in this particular project since the 2018, and presently I am looking at radiotelemetry data of macaques as well.
Okay, great. For our listeners who don't understand anthropogenic, can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so anthropogenic, what I mean by anthropogenic is that these landscapes where these macaques are presently inhabiting, or where they are presently, these are human modified, where there is a huge presence of humans, human habitations, also agricultural lands, roads and everything, like any human modified structures. So this area is very fragmented. There are pockets of forest, reserve forests and small patches of sal plantations, but it is mostly dominated by human presence. And these macaques have learned and adapted to live in this sort of an environment.
Okay. Any idea how long people have been living there and how long people and macaques have been living alongside each other in that area? I didn't put this on the list. Sorry.
It's absolutely fine. So, I mean, though the historical range of the species encompasses this particular area. Though when I started working and when I used to interact with the local people, so to just give a background of this particular study area. So this area is contiguous with a protected area. So, and protected area by meaning that it is by legislation, by law, in the Indian Wildlife Protection Act, is not accessible for exploitation by the local people and everything. It is protected as a nature haven where the animals are being conserved. So this particular area is in the same landscape. But what happened is, some 50 years back, I may not be right with the exact date, but there was a dam built in the in Tehri region, in the higher parts of Uttarakhand, and then quite a few settlements and villages were actually submerged because of the reservoir that was being created for the dam. So then this place being close to the capital of this particular state, and Dehradun has been a very prominent city right from the time when India was still under the colonial rule. So there are a lot of institutes here. There are a lot of research institutes right from that time. And then this particular place was actually chosen for these people who had lost their villages or their settlements due to the dam's reservoir to resettle here. So many people who are from the older generations, they have actually come up to me and said that initially there weren't macaques. But
Okay.
slowly over like a period of like a decade or 2 decades or so, they started seeing that macaques are actually coming in and started living in and around those areas. Again, there are two particular instances that I can actually talk about. Is that one being, there are people who have actually told that, in certain parts of the cities in and around this particular area, there was a problem of macaques in the 70s and 80s. And oftentimes, these macaques were captured from the cities and released here. So that is how the macaque population built up. But again, because this part is contiguous to the Rajaji National Park area, Rajaji National Park has always had rhesus macaques
Okay.
in it. So it could also be a fact that with time, when these macaques, which were in the periphery of the national park, they realized that these areas provide us protection from predators of not being hunted, and at the same time I can access food. So they might have moved into these areas.
Okay. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So where do the macaques fit in, sort of? Well, I suppose this is a repeat of what I've just asked, more or less. But how do people relate to the macaques where you are in this area?
So this is again a very important question, and more importantly, it's a double-edged sword for the people here that reside in these areas and also for the macaques. So interestingly, people interact with the macaques here in two ways. One being considering them to be pests, that they are a nuisance, they come and destroy our crops, they come and destroy our property, or they litter. That is the first idea, and maximum number of people will have that. But at the same time, because of the cultural and the religious influences of the maximum number of people in this part of the like this part of the country especially, they consider it to be a religious figure, and they relate it to Lord Hanuman, who is a very prominent deity in Hinduism. And then there are people who actually want the macaques to be there. They provision them with food. They'll offer them foods on certain days and over the time period. But, it's a very dicey situation where they want macaques to be there, but they don't want to be a part of the conflict situation.
Yes, that makes sense. When they're fed, are they usually fed in particular places, or are they fed wherever they happen to be if it's the right day?
I mean, in that sense, there are certain particular locations where, like, for example, there are temples. On particular days in the temples, like, for example, there is a event taking place. It may be a marriage, it may be some sort of other occasion or a function that is occurring at that point in time, or on certain holy days, on certain particular days of religious significance, people would actually seek macaques to come to that particular area, and then they will be offering them with food, mostly fruits, and also sweets and other sorts of items that they are provided to them. This is a completely cultural aspect of it, because they want macaques, they view macaques as a symbol of God, a symbol of holiness, and then they would offer these particular items to them in the hope that it serves them some sort of a pious angle to it. But then overall, if you look at the macaques in this region, one important place where they do access food, and which I am considering human generated food or human food as such, is from garbage dumps. So because this part of the city, I mean, it's a suburban area, it's still transitioning from some sort of a village to a sort of a town. So the whole sanitation purpose, it's, though there are regulations to it, everything, but oftentimes people do discard garbage, do discard food items in the open. And these are the places where the macaques will always frequent. And they know that they have access to very good, high quality, high calorific food. And these are the areas where, even if you're walking through this particular landscape, is the place where you probably have the highest probability of, encountering macaques.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Earlier, you mentioned that people may see them as pests or as a nuisance, that sort of thing. Do they, in some instances, cause like real hardship, or do they present like a real danger towards people? So, for example, are there injuries, or are people's livelihoods affected in this particular situation?
So in certain cases, yes, their livelihoods can be affected. in the sense that there are certain families and certain households which are which practice subsistence agriculture. So what they basically do is they have a very small plot of land, and the whole annual income of that particular family is actually dependent on whatever they grow on that particular small piece of land. And this is never a very huge harvest that they can actually gain a huge amount of financial gains. But, at times when there might be droughts, there might be rains, which might affect the crop in a completely climatic angle. But then if they have had a crop harvest coming up, and then, the macaques come in there and they damage the crops, a substantial portion of their profits that they might have gained by selling their harvest is actually reduced. So that has been an issue. But the percentage of the families here falling in that category are comparatively lower.
Okay.
But
okay.
Again, what happens is, because of this very dynamic situation that the macaques have with people, they have slowly understood how to deal with people in this area. So they know what are the regions, what are the areas. Even when they enter into a, complete constructed house, they know where the kitchen is and where to go and access food. They know that, people might be drying fruits for pickles and other sorts of condiments on their roofs. So they seek out these particular areas. And at times, when a macaque is inside someone's home, there are chances of a completely negative interaction between the two. There have been multiple instances where people actually have approached our institute as well as the municipality of the region saying that the macaque has bitten me, my kid was bitten. Or there have been instances where, the pets have been harmed, where the pets got into the whole scuffle. These have led to some sort of like people harboring a very negative attitude towards macaques in this region. Though it's very difficult for us researchers, for my institute, as well as for other people to actually make people understand that, the macaque may be at fault from your perspective, but the very reason the macaque is there is because we have kind of made the macaque understand that these are places where you can actually access food.
Yeah. Okay.
With very little risks.
All right.
Yeah.
The next question sort of follows on from that, in that, I mean, obviously people will have reactions and they'll take, well, they may take action as individuals. You also might have the government or other bodies taking action because of this. I'm wondering what sorts of actions are taken both by individuals and by sort of official bodies, and whether they're, well, one, are they effective? And two, are there welfare consequences for the macaques in any of this? I mean, I'm thinking that there could be welfare consequences in that maybe they get physically hurt. But also, when macaques are fed lots of sweets and stuff like that, they can actually develop real health issues and stuff like that. I'm wondering about all of that. What do you see?
So one important thing that we can actually find here, of course, there are attempts made by even people personally to actually separate themselves from the macaque. So the concept here that goes is, the macaque should be in the forest. So for example, if someone has a house contiguous to a forest, they would want the macaque to stick to the forest. They don't want them to come into this particular place. So they have this mental idea of a demarcation between that should be macaque's area, that this should be mine area. And then other than the physical barriers and everything that has come up, and oftentimes people have put up very serious kinds of barriers where, the wires have edges, very sharp edges, so that they can deter macaques from coming into that particular plot or that particular area. Over a period of maybe 2 to 3 months, the macaques get habituated to that thing. They understand how to actually maneuver across it. But then initially there are very, very severe injuries that do occur. We have also found like macaques where, they have gashes in and around their neck regions because they were trying to go through that area. And unfortunately, like oftentimes they do succumb to those injuries, especially if it is in the summers and the monsoons, because that leads to maggots developing. But then other than the physical attitudes of it, the most serious case that ever occurred in these parts was that, people do actively chase them out. Often they try to hit them, and, certain macaques do get injured in the very process. Like they will have fractures in their limbs and stuff. But then one important factor that you mentioned about is like coming from the perspective of the government, when the government is actually undertaking, the municipalities or the forest department of the local area is actually involved. So this, my state here, so Dehradun is the capital of the state of Uttarakhand in northern India. So Uttarakhand's forest department has been undertaking captures of macaques and sterilizing them. So they have a sterilization center. Uh, I mean, a lot of people who are accustomed to how macaque sterilization works may be familiar with the sterilization project in Himachal Pradesh, another North Indian state, where they have been sterilizing macaques for since like 2005-6. But here in Uttarakhand, they have started sterilizing them. But then, though the population is controlled, we cannot say that the intensity of conflict has decreased.
Yeah. Okay.
So one important factor that might come into play here. So recently there was a report like last year that, in case of Uttarakhand, we had close to there was a significant decrease in the population of macaques that the forest department actually reported. But what happened was that, the people who actually go out into the field or into these particular areas where conflict has been reported and then they capture the macaques, they are never able to capture the complete troop that is actually involved in the conflict. They might tend to capture a certain portion of it. Second, when they are sterilized at a certain place, and oftentimes there might be chances of intermixing, and then this increases the complete effect of how actually macaques go about in a completely new landscape where they might be released. So there have been issues with these things. And then the most important thing that occurs, once you remove a chunk of the population from a particular area, it actually opens up avenues for other macaques to come in and colonize that place. So this is a continuous loop. And unfortunately, even if the population of the macaques is decreasing, we probably are not seeing a decrease in the intensity of conflict that the population is facing.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about the populations, like the rhesus macaques in that region as a whole? Is it a healthy population? Is it only really healthy in certain areas? Is it under threat in any way, or are they actually overabundant? I know that with some other macaque species, they're perceived as being overabundant because they're so visible sometimes in areas like where you're describing. But overall, the populations are really threatened. So what's the story with the rhesus macaques and their populations?
I guess, an important thing here. So, we had a very long study back, and this was conducted by, of course, Professor Charles Southwick and then Professor Siddiqui in the Aligarh Muslim University. So they had been monitoring this North Indian macaque population in and around Aligarh, that particular region, for around 40 years. And they kind of reported like a 473% rise in the population.
Okay.
Yeah. So this 473% rise in the population is something that has stuck on to the people who are concerned with managing wildlife. And yes, the macaques are abundant, but these macaques being abundant are constricted to certain patches.
Yes,
it's not like if you come across the whole city of Dehradun, you will find macaques everywhere and anywhere. There are certain regions which the macaques inhabit. There could be a lot of factors to it. Access to food, access to refuge, which is very, very important. But yes, macaques are abundant in a sense. Though there has not been a complete, a demographic study of the whole species across the Indian landscape, but certain states have reported increase in macaques populations as such, including Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand, both of them. And these are healthy populations, because if I talk about the study troops that I am following around, so they are large troops. So each troop has somewhere around 50 to 60 individuals in one particular troop and inhabiting a very small area, somewhere around 0.5 square kilometers of area. And they are inhabiting that particular area, and there are almost 60 individuals in one particular troop. So for a person who is not accustomed to macaques, who comes in here, may find it very overwhelming that there are macaques, these many macaques in such a small place. That is obviously a factor.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, we need to be very, very careful before actually undertaking a management practice, because we need the actual numbers. Before we have the actual numbers, scientifically proven numbers, I mean, we should be conservative as to how much they have increased and what has been their growth.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. You've already talked a little bit about the way human behavior influences the way macaques behave, but I wonder if you can expand on that, because I think this is starting to get really into your area of study, isn't it?
So, what is interesting to see in these sorts of landscapes, and probably across many other areas where humans and macaques are interacting in a very regular manner, is that, the way they have started to understand what are those particular novel food items that they can actually access, actually learn. So very interestingly, we have observations of macaques actually raiding shops for soft drinks and for chocolates, these sorts of things. So initially, because this is just a personal observation, in 2018, when these macaques had no idea as to what a chocolate looks like in its wrapper, or how to, access, because a soft drink bottle, they do not know that they should be drinking it, but they observe people consuming them. They come across these particular items in the garbage dumps, and then they try it out, and then they know that, okay, this is the item. So then they will actually go into shops where these items are on display, and they will grab hold of whatever they can and they'll run. And this is what they have been doing. And a lot of complaints are actually about this issue, that, they come in here for soft drinks, they'll carry away packets of chips. So Lay's is something that they very properly seek something, because, and one of the main reasons is that even if there are no chips inside, the potato crisps are not there, they would still lick the wrapper because of the salt content. So that is very, very interesting.
It is interesting. I shouldn't be giggling about it, but at the same time, I'm like, yeah, I know how they feel. Like, it's tasty.
I'm pretty sure, like something like salt for their electrolyte content in their body is a very important resource to them. And when they come across something like a packet of crisps, which has a high amount of salt already in it, even if there are no crisps in it, they, I mean, I've seen individuals fight over just a wrapper of crisps, because anyone wants to take it and lick it, because they want that salt for them. And
do you think they're getting enough junk food that we'll actually start to see, like human populations that eat loads of crisps and soft drinks and stuff like that wind up having higher percentages of whatever health issues? Yes. Is there anybody looking at that in macaques who do this that you're aware of?
Presently, I'm unaware of anyone looking at their, biomedical and biophysiological parameters as such.
Yeah.
But I can mention about, one particular instance, which, I'm part of a larger project. So one of my supervisors is actually looking at Dr. Kawalni. She's a wildlife veterinarian, and she is looking at, how antibiotic resistance might actually seep into these sorts of macaques. Because it is another, again, because garbage disposal is a problem. And even if there are, medicine is something that is, people do use in a very regular basis. And if macaques are raiding homes, if they are raiding shops, they have easy access to these particular food, the medicinal items that at their disposal. So what happens often is that, they probably might not be seeking these particular things to consume, but they'll come across this. And the first instinct that they have is they'll put it in their mouth. They'll crush it. So that happens. They come across discarded medical items, often in garbage dumps, which they tend to lick, they tend to consume. And it is a sort of a problem which one of my supervisors, as I mentioned, is trying to figure out as to what could be the influences of antibiotic resistance developing in these sorts of macaques. Because as we already know, because people predict that, the next pandemic is probably going to be because of the antibiotic resistance that is developing so thoroughly in these microbes. So if one of the model organisms is humans, and now we have these other organisms which are actually wild, but because they are close to humans, they might develop. So we are unaware of the plethora of microbes that can come into the whole gamut of this idea. So that is something that we need to be very, very careful about. But unfortunately, in all these macaque range countries, including India and larger parts of Southeast Asia, I mean, this has been a problem, and this is something that needs to be looked at a far more important manner.
Interesting. Well, it's terrifying, but it's really interesting also. So changing gears a little bit, you talked a little bit about some efforts that are being made to mitigate the situation by sterilization.
Yes.
What do you think should be done, if anything? What would be the best approach as far as you can see from your particular understanding of how monkeys behave? What could humans do differently to ease things a little bit?
Yes. I mean, one important thing that we need to look into here is, trying to understand how these macaques actually inhabit these particular areas. Because a lot of time, these management practices or this management, the projects that are brought in, they often do not take into consideration the ecology of the species. The ecology of the species is something that has been thoroughly covered in published literature. But then whenever a particular group of animals is inhabiting a new environment, there's undoubtedly there will be subtle differences in the way they actually behave, they actually use that particular habitat. And this is something that needs to be considered. And so maybe another important thing that comes into play is these management practices or these management projects, when they come in, they look for very quick redressal, which is not the solution. So quick redressal is something that can only work in the short term. If you need to have this problem solved, you need to look at strategies which will actually provide you with a sustained result throughout the time period. And also to maintain the fact that the aim should not be to exterminate the animals completely from that particular habitat. It should be to maintain a very subtle balance between macaques as well as humans inhabiting that particular area. So, I mean, there are studies even in my group that, we hope that down the line, some sort of management practices can be developed on the basis of the introduction of immunocontraceptives, where if the female macaques could actually be vaccinated, you could delay the time period of them breeding or, they getting impregnated by the males. So that could actually give you a certain period of time where there is not a boom of babies coming in, boom of infants coming in. So, but the problem in these sorts of approaches that it will take time for the results to show. So oftentimes in trying to gain something quickly, because of many motivations that come to practitioners as well as to the local governance that sanctions these sorts of activities and projects, we tend to lose focus on that. And somewhere down the line, yes, you get a redressal for a year, and by the next year, you are again facing the same problem.
Okay, thank you. I'm wondering, two related questions. What can people in the area there who want to help reduce any sort of negative interactions do to help stop that? Just individuals. And is there anything that people listening from afar can do to help in such situations as well? Whether it's an actual action they can take or just kind of being informed. Is anything you can think of?
Again, I mean, it will go down to the fact. So if I talk about the local people, so there have been sensitization programs that have been run by my institute, and often when we go out into the field, we try to talk to as many people as possible, and we try to tell them that you should not be feeding monkeys. You should not be discarding your garbage in this sort of a manner, because it gives easy access to these animals to them. Because today they come and access garbage here, they understand that this is something that they can eat. The next day they will be in your home, and that is something that you will not like. At the same time, when you are actually going out into the forests or into these particular areas where macaques inhabit and actively seeking macaques so that you can feed them with biscuits, with cookies, with fruits and everything, is the same thing. You are, in a negative way, in a very, very subtle way, and in a very, very, indirect way, actually inviting these macaques to come into these human dominated areas more and more, because they know that that is a sort of food item that can only be found there. So a lot of people do understand this factor, but the majority of them, it is very difficult to understand as to how a very innocent and small act of handing a packet of biscuits to a macaque can actually turn out to be so huge in consequences later on. So I am not sure if that is a failure on our part, that we have not been able to put that point forward to these sorts of people, or that, somewhere down the line, they tend to judge it from the fact that this is something very minor. This should not be influencing this in a huge landscape. So these are certain interactions that we have often had with the local people here. And I was actually told, so again, coming back to the mythological perspective of it. So because, the day Tuesday is considered to be very auspicious for Lord Hanuman in Hindu mythology. So you will actually find that on Tuesdays, people do come out, and they'll come from very far away regions, knowing that these are places that are inhabited by macaques, and they will actually hand food out to these people, to the macaques. A lot many local people who know that the macaque should not be fed. If it is not Tuesday, they will go and object. But if it's Tuesday, they will probably refrain from objecting because of the fact that that they do not want to hurt anyone else's religious sentiments.
Yeah, of course. It must be really hard to tell people to stop doing something that has real religious significance. That's not as simple as just saying you shouldn't and people saying okay, is it?
And also the fact that, there are certain people who have come up to me and said that I have been doing this, my father has been doing this, my grandfather has been doing this. No one has ever come up to me and told me, that, you should stop feeding monkeys. Or someone will come up to me and say, like if I find someone actually handing out bananas to monkeys there, and I go up to them and say, see, you should not feed these macaques here because this is going to create a problem later on for the local people. Or even if you move away from here, the problem persists for the people here, for the landscape here, for the macaques here. And then they say, it's a very pious activity to actually feed another organism. How can you actually come up to me and say that I should not feed another organism when it is part of my culture, of my religious aspect? So these are very, certain important incidences that do take place, and it is very, very difficult to actually go around these things. But maybe the only possible way is to persist with it. One thing that could be done is, passing laws and legislations where you find certain sorts of activities of these sorts, where people are actually afraid of the fact that, okay, probably I should not be doing this. I am going to be fined by the government. Laws do exist. So India's Wildlife Protection Act is probably one of the most stringent ones in these categories. But then because of the religious angle to it and the socio-cultural perspective of the people probably will not go and intervene. Even if the law authorities, they do see doing this, because again, no one wants to actually go and object to someone else's religious affairs. So that is something that needs to be looked at in these sorts of areas, and probably that is going to be a problem. So, yes.
Okay. So I just have one final question, which is just about you and your relationship to macaques. I'm interested to know, why macaques? Why is this what you are studying? What has drawn you towards this particular thing?
So, when I completed my master's degree and I was looking for PhD positions, I was very interested in animal behavior per se. And I always thought that primates in general would be one of the best organisms to study and to fuel my passion for conserving wildlife and understanding how animals actually go about in their day-to-day activities. So that is how I started into macaques. And frankly, I started working with macaques in 2016 around, when I used to go and start following troops. So I have worked in certain parts of southern India, and then where I again, those were urban macaques as well. So in the city of Bangalore. Yeah, so I looked at those bonnet macaques there, and then later on, when I joined the PhD program here in Wildlife Institute of India, the campus itself harbors so many macaque troops, and then you have these macaques in and around the region. So I spoke to my supervisor about it. I told him, so, this is something that I would want to do. I would want to pursue, and going by the whole angle to it, and because of the existing project of trying to deal with species which are in human wildlife conflict, it kind of paved the way for me. But I mean, frankly speaking, and I will be true to the point here and honest, I love the monkeys because, again, it's the perspective that comes into play for a person, even for another wildlife researcher who is not studying primates or macaques per se. For them, the outlook that they have towards a macaque, because it's one particular species which is lingering in the corridors of the institute, and then someone who is trying to walk through the institute always is fearful that the macaque might charge me. But then if someone actually starts following these troops, you start identifying these individuals, you start understanding how the troop dynamics play in the whole thing, then you realize the multitude and the levels of interactions, the levels of way they're actually playing out in this whole area. And it's that working natural laboratory out there to understand a lot of issues and lot of questions in biological sciences, even in ecological sciences. And every morning I look forward to looking at one of those individuals and see, okay, this is this particular individual. I have very fancy names for some of them, along with my colleague Divya. So
can you give us an example?
And yeah, so, she's that particular individual is one of my favorites. We call her Monroe. She's named on Marilyn Monroe because she acts like a diva in the troop, even though she is not the higher ranked individual. There are other female macaques who are higher ranked than her, but she has a diva kind of an attitude. And one of the most striking features that she has a white spot here, which kind of made us relate to Monroe's the whole facial feature that the actress had. So that is one of them. And and if I speak of the male macaques that I have, so one of the male macaques is we've named him Van Gogh. I'm really sorry to people if who are very fond of art and art history, but we've named him Van Gogh because he does not have his left ear.
Okay, amazing. Oh, yeah. Wow. Oh, I'd like to meet these monkeys. If you get a chance, if you have a photograph of Monroe or Van Gogh, please feel free to send it, and maybe we can use it as like the cover image for this podcast or something like that.
Sure. Of course.
All right.
I'll do. Maybe I'll just, because we were talking about how the macaques are adapting to this particular area. So one important factor that we are presently seeing, because I was analyzing my own data, and when we interacted in August, so this was one thing that I was discussing, that, what about the other places? But in my particular study area, one important thing that governs these macaques is that, even though, we always look at these macaques as a very, very generalist species, that they can stay, live and eat anywhere and everywhere. But probably that is not the case. Even in these human-dominated landscapes, even in these habitats, the places where they can actually rest, the places where they can actually spend some time without being interrupted by a human being are very, very little.
Oh, wow.
So, yes. And, they might have to travel for certain regions for food, but they need to keep coming back to these particular small patches of refugia in their particular home range. And because they're trying to access these particular regions, people will always be seeing, okay, in the morning at around 8 o'clock, I saw the macaques crossing. They might not be the same troop There might be multiple troops, but because they're trying to access those particular very little area that they can actually rest, they can actually spend some time grooming each other, interacting with each other, and multiple troops might try to access those particular areas. So over a day, people keep seeing the macaques there. Even they might not be the same individuals, they might not be the same troop, they will see macaques there. And that is one of the reason I always feel that, it can induce that sort of a negative thought process in the humans who are continuously seeing macaques at the forefront, saying that the macaques are always here. So that is conflict. That is how the whole attitude towards the macaques change, that they're always there. They're always there. It's just not the fact that, we fail to consider that even for them, they require spaces where they can actually be themselves.
Yeah, that's a good point.
They have to be in places where they are not always wary of pet dogs chasing them or wary of people pelting them with stones.
Yeah. As everybody deserves to not be pelted by stones from time to time.
Sure.
So I want to thank you. Because of time, I need to wrap up the interview, but thank you so much for coming to talk to us today. It's really interesting. I think lots of people are going to enjoy listening to you talk about these macaques. And I'm just wondering if you have any particular final thoughts to share before we sign off.
Yeah, this was a great experience for me. I thank you once again for giving me this opportunity. And I would like to highlight the fact, for anyone listening, I understand that species as such, like macaques, which are in your vicinity, but then again, you consider them to be wild, you consider them to be feral, is something, that creates that negative attitude. I would just say, as a species, just as a living being, just as an organism, you just need to experience them. You need to see how they go about doing, and maybe that will create that form of appreciation in your mind, in your heart for the species, and not just have a negative attitude towards them, because they are brilliant organisms. And we need to consider the fact that just because they are so good at adapting themselves to these sorts of habitats, that is a plus point for them. That's a plus point for their evolutionary lineage, for their livelihood, and how they go about doing their own business. It's just that we were there first to modify them and force them to do what they're doing today.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. You can find everything you need to know about our work and connect with us at asiaforanimals.com. Tune in for the next episode. Asia for Animals Coalition, a united voice for Asia's animals.